Good Up is our space to talk about those experiences in life we didn't know we all had in common. We're the after-work happy hour conversation with your best friend.
You good up bad, like, hello.
The place where you bring up the hard parts of life, the ones that made you laugh, and the things that made you who you are. Because who said becoming good up wasn't a little bit uncomfortable? Stay tuned for more information about this week's episode.
The following is a paid advertisement by Empath Psychological Services. This episode of the Good Up Pod is sponsored by Empath Psychological Services, locally owned, millennial-operated therapy for Virgin Islanders by Virgin Islanders. Here at the Good Up Pod, we're all about shedding light on life experiences that have contributed to who we are and learning to navigate them to find a feeling that's, well, good up.
For some of us, that journey includes therapy. Empath Psychological Services operates with the belief that life's challenges are not all of who we are.
They aim to create a non-judgmental environment to help their clients harness their own power and to find their path to mental well-being. Good Up and Empath Psychological Services share a passion for helping others navigate their own healing their way.
If you're interested in teletherapy services in the U.S. Virgin Islands or the state of Texas, check out the link in the description box for more information on how you can book a session with Empath Psychological Services. Hey, beautiful people, and welcome back to another episode of the Good Up podcast. It's Saturday. It's early as hell where
It's
I
early.
am. So I'm like half awake. We record at 7 a.m. I know this every weekend, and yet I go to sleep late every Friday night. Like, I'll be fine. And then my alarm goes off and I'm like, oh, okay.
Yikes.
So welcome to the Good Up people. I am super excited about this week's episode. How do you feel, Deidre?
Girl, you know how I feel.
So we've been talking about
No, I
this
feel a lot
for
better.
weeks.
I feel a lot better about it since we had the conversation. But you
Good.
know how I feel about it.
We've been talking about this episode for weeks, and Deidre's like, hey, I don't know if I like this topic. I don't know if I like this topic. I'm like, it's going to be fine.
But you know
It's gonna be
why?
fine.
It's more so people's response. I feel like it's such a black and white conversation and nobody factors in like the in-between.
And
I'm
that's
like,
what we're
and
going to
it's
talk
people's
about
reactions.
today.
I don't be having the bandwidth for people on the internet and their reactions. I'm gonna go in my little hole and then what? Where's Deidre? It's not here.
Well, that's why I'm excited about today's episode, because I think that we are going to have a really well-rounded conversation.
Absolutely.
And we're going to really get into depth in a way that a lot of times when you're talking about these conversations in short, clips on social media or in comment sections, people don't come into that objectively. And they also don't come into it with empathy. So I'm ready to have this conversation on the podcast. But before we get there, we actually have a guest today, and I'm super excited. Her name is Kavita, and I want Kavita to go ahead and introduce herself. And welcome to the Good Up podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be on, and I sincerely appreciate it. This is a topic that's really relevant to my life, and I have a platform on TikTok, that Better to Better, where I talk about pretty privilege, self-love and the struggles associated with it in society. So I'm excited to have this conversation and see where it goes.
Yeah, same.
We're glad to have you.
Yeah.
I feel like you coming on is why I felt better about the conversation.
Yeah. And
aside from hey, I was holding space for my big feelings.
But this is what I keep telling the audience, is that like Deidre and I are sisters. So whenever there's
Actual
a subject that is a little tough for one of us, or like we have different views on, we always come together and we talk about it before we come on the show, because it's important to
nobody wants to
visit
feel
those topics.
blindsided.
Exactly.
Or
Exactly.
like they're not factored in. So
Exactly.
that's why this podcast is doing as well as it's doing, because Hayes and I are not co-workers. We're sisters who do a podcast together.
Boom. Exactly.
And that's awesome that you guys are, and it's also great that both of you also seem very open-minded, right? Like, even if you might not understand or resonate with the topic, you're open to discussing and listening. So it's
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the audience is too. But speaking of the audience, I'm going to give the audience context on what we're talking about, because I know they're like, okay, but what is the topic? The topic for this week, for those of you who are listening, we're talking about the concept of pretty privilege, also known as beauty bias. So when people talk about pretty privilege or beauty bias, and you're gonna hear me use both terms because prior to doing the research for this episode, I only heard of it spoken as pretty privilege. And I think beauty bias adds some more context to the conversation.
Absolutely.
So pretty privilege or beauty bias works on the principle that people who are deemed more attractive based on accepted societal beauty standards have an upper hand in the world and are afforded many opportunities that other people who don't fit societal beauty standards are not. And that's specifically pretty privilege. But what I read about beauty bias is taking that concept and looking at it from both sides, right? So looking at it as people who don't meet societal standards not being treated a certain way or afforded the same access to things, but then people who do also being treated a certain way with the assumption that their personality or the access that they have in life is based on meeting those societal beauty standards, right?
Wow. Okay.
So,
this is my first time hearing about it in this sense. It's very well rounded.
Which is why I was like,
that.
we need to talk about this because I think so. There are 3 people in the room who have their own experiences as it relates to pretty privilege and beauty bias. And on this podcast, we've spoken about things in kind of connected to this, like colorism. We've spoken about things like fat phobia. So Deidre and I, when we had this conversation initially, were speaking on it from perspectives of people sort of on the opposite end of pretty privilege, right? Like I felt like I don't benefit from it, whereas Deidre felt like she has in life, but
it's not all it's cracked up to be.
It's not all it's cracked up to be.
It's not a cakewalk.
But then in thinking about it more, I'm like, but at the same time, Deidre is a dark-skinned Black woman who, while benefiting from pretty privilege in some ways, has also not benefited from pretty privilege because of this societal beauty standard of fitting like Eurocentric.
I think there's like a lot of intersectionality with it, right? Because like someone who is white with pretty privilege will obviously have a different experience than someone who is a woman of color, just because racism and white supremacy and colorism plays a role. Like it's not that it's like a spectrum, right? Basically, it's not like you have it or you don't. Like there's different degrees of it. And
absolutely. Yeah. So listen, in doing the research, I was like, this makes sense. And I was like, writing everything down. But I'm going to start.
It's a very layered conversation.
It's a very, very layered conversation. So I want the audience to come into this episode with that, with knowing that when it comes to conversations on privilege, it's never black or white, because privilege always varies across the board and on your life experiences, on your culture, on where you live. Because I promise you, when I'm in the Virgin Islands, I feel like I benefit from pretty privilege. And when I'm in Arizona, I don't exist. So.
Right. Same, right? Because like in the Black community, for the most part, right? I would. Yeah. So it really does depend. I feel like in other communities, I'm seen as more beautiful. In my community, like I know Black people find me beautiful. However, you know, my complexion takes away from that a little bit. You know, sometimes the girlies are like, I mean, she pretty, but
I'll start us off with this. We know that on a societal level, the standard of beauty is associated with European features. So how do beauty standards, and we touched on this a little bit, how do beauty standards show up in your culture within your specific like cultural demographic, and what is defined as beautiful for your culture and sort of the area where you were raised or the people you were raised around? And I'll pass it to Kavita first, and then we'll jump in.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. So I'm Indian, and I feel like I feel like it's almost inevitable not to bring up colorism in this topic, because I feel like even if I look at like our famous like actresses or those like that, like it's very much also people who are more on the lighter tone, and they've even endorsed products like in India. There's a product called Fair and Lovely where they'll like push, like it's supposed to lighten up your skin, so they really push more like colorism on it. And I feel like even if someone has like beautiful features, whether it's like their eyes, their nose, or anything, that kind of is taken away from the color of their skin, which is unfortunate, right? So I don't know if it's more feature based versus colorism just overriding it, but I think features I think even in my demographic, I feel like Eurocentric features still comes into play, which I feel like would be like, I think the biggest one that a lot of us are familiar is the nose, right? I feel like the nose is like one of the most distinguishing features, and like you have the eyes, and I think a lot of people generally prefer like bigger, like doe eyes or something like that. So I think that's how I know, but unfortunately I've seen the colorism play a much bigger role than just like the features itself.
Yeah, that's so important. I used to be very, very into pageantry. I'm not anymore. We'll talk about that in another episode. But I worked in like in the international like pageant scene, and I remember looking at the representatives from India and from these other like Asian and South Asian countries, and you would never think that people from those countries or with those backgrounds had darker skin, because these girls were always like super, super, super light. It's super interesting to see. So, Deidre, I will pass it to you for the same question. Like, I think we both know this, but you know, what is the standard of beauty within our culture?
Well, for one, we know it comes back to like Eurocentric features. The closer you are to some sense of Eurocentrism, I hope I said that correctly, the more pretty you're considered, right? So in our community, you know, if you have light skin and curly hair, you're deemed beautiful automatically. A lot of the time, I find that in the Black community, whether or not you have like a certain type of bone structure, the minute your skin is, you know, lighter than a certain complexion, you're automatically considered pretty. I'm dark skinned, which has not always been considered desirable in our community. But what kind of creates that privilege for me is because I have some Eurocentric features. But it does come back down to what? White supremacy, honey. Like, it's interesting
Every time
how white supremacy is influencing all of it.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. And we've talked about it. We talked about it, especially in the colorism episode, when in that episode, Diamond made a really important point of like, I recognize how I don't benefit from colorism, but then like even within our subset, there are Black women who have more Afrocentric features, who are plus size, who have wider faces, who don't benefit from this like new wave of like, oh, dark skin is beautiful.
Yes,
like,
exactly. Because in recent years, being dark skinned, especially in our community, has somehow become a trend, which is very disturbing. They're not celebrating all dark skin. They're celebrating the dark skin that looks like me and my twin. They're celebrating Gabrielle Union, Lupita Nyong'o, but they're not celebrating Gabby. How do I say her last name?
Gabby Sidibe.
Right. They're not celebrating her. Yeah. Which is like, you don't get to celebrate our skin if you're not going to celebrate all of us with this skin. It's just not worth it. We don't want it. We literally don't want it.
And then that's like where that intersection happens.
Yeah, there's a lot of like overlaps with different things. And I think, like I said, like, like the features help, but like, again, like even like fat phobia, right? You can have someone who is exceptionally beautiful, but people are going to see their size first, not their
like Lizzo.
face. Yeah.
Lizzo's bone structure, she's stunning, but because she's fat, the girlies just can't. And then they keep using her as this example, and I resent that weight and health keep coming up when there are people that are slim whose health is in the fucking toilet.
And I think so. The thing that gets me about the whole Lizzo conversation, right, is that I wish people would accept that their issue is that they don't find her attractive by societal standards. And it has nothing to do with health, because like you pointed out, there are thin people who are not healthy, and being healthy should not be like the baseline for whether you treat somebody with respect or whether you find like they're deserving of respect, right? Because there are chronically sick people in this world, and just because they're not healthy doesn't mean that like we should be treating them differently, right?
Exactly.
But yeah, I think in my experience, it's always been like so many different intersections, right? Because I am Black, but I'm also Hispanic, right? And in the Black side of our culture, especially in the Virgin Islands, having light skin, having straight hair when I did, or having the curl pattern that I have is considered attractive, right? Yes. It's considered that ideal. But then in the Hispanic community, having darker skin, having a wider face, having it to them Afrocentric features is considered not attractive. So,
like the curly hair is not really you like in the Hispanic communities,
it was frowned upon for a long time.
It's
frowned upon to not have that like very Eurocentric straight, and even my straight hair wasn't like straight enough for the Hispanic people.
They wanted straight and silky.
They wanted straight super long hair. So it's always interesting. And then of course I've lived my life as a fat woman. So in both communities then, even though I'm attractive to an extent, then here comes the fat phobia of you could be so much more attractive if you were skinnier, which again, white supremacy, because fat phobia is inherently a white supremacy
thing.
It comes from that, right? So it's interesting, and I wanted to make sure I started with that question to kind of talk about like how we intersect and how we experience, pretty privilege and beauty bias, like from our different perspectives. So with that, I think my next question is how have you experienced bias, if you have, or different treatment because of not meeting the societal standard, or if you've met the societal standard, and how does that make you feel? Like, how does it feel to navigate this bullshit, essentially?
I'm gonna try my best to articulate this. So I have not met that for like my whole life, even till current day, and it's a struggle. Like because, and I think people feel like it just affects like one area of your life, but I think it's because women in society are largely valued for their looks, and that's basically it. Like you can have intellect, you can have this or that, but that doesn't matter at the end of the day. And I think it comes down to this concept, which maybe a lot of you have read about, which kind of overlaps with the halo effect, right? The idea that someone who is seen as more attractive is associated with a lot more positive traits versus if you don't meet the standard, people automatically assume like if you were like quirky, they'll be like, oh my God, you're so weird and look at you with disgust. But if you're attractive, they're like, oh my God, that's so cool and like quirky. And I think obviously the biggest area of life that I've seen it affects is probably like dating, given that like I think looks plays a huge role. It's a prerequisite when it comes to that, but even affects like day-to-day interactions. Like sometimes service people, they'll like ignore you. Like I've had situations where like I'll ask them a question and they won't even answer and they'll just go to somebody else. And like isolated those incidents are totally fine, but like accumulated kind of makes you feel like you're less than, right? Even if you are like show up as like you're polite and stuff like that, it just feels like it's not good enough. So it just kind of like is a very dehumanizing experience, right? Like it makes you question yourself. And I think it's more difficult, at least what I found on social media when I like express this, people are like, oh, just change all this about yourself. And I think understand like I've gone through the avenues of trying all those different methods. And I think we were talking about earlier how like some people will opt to suggest to get plastic surgery, which I can discuss later on. But like a lot of people aren't open to like just understanding and validating like this is a real thing. Or this, they'll be like, oh, just be confident. And I think confidence is important, but I don't think people realize like you're shamed for being confident. Like people will question you instead of reaffirming what you see.
I hate the word confidence so much. Like, I love the concept, but I hate the word because to me it's so inflammatory, especially like as a fat person and as a person like navigating these spaces. Everything is you just be confident, or when you are, it's I love your confidence in a very backhanded way of like, oh, you're confident, but you shouldn't be, and I love that. And it's like, do you hear yourself? do you hear yourself? And then what tells you that I'm not confident, or that
or that you don't love yourself, right? That's
that I don't love myself. Like, exactly.
It's when the girlies are like, if you don't love yourself, who will?
Yeah.
Like, bitch, what are you talking about?
I'm glad that you said that, Deidre, because I know who won't.
They're showing me every day that they don't.
They show me every day, and they say it to me, and they say it to me online. They say it to me in person. Like, I know who doesn't. So if I don't love myself, who will? Like, I get that. You trust me. I get that. But Deidre, I'm going to toss it over to you for the same question. So like, how do you experience pretty privilege / beauty bias, and how does it make you feel?
So for one, it's like a fine line, right? I've gotten jobs not for my skill set, but because of how attractive I am. And it has disgusted me, right? I'm coming with these qualifications, especially like when I first entered food and beverage, like my first job as a waitress. I know I got the job because I'm a good looking woman, right? I didn't have much experience, but luckily I have a personality for hospitality, so that helped. But because I'm attractive, and the owners kind of weren't even shy about it. Like the owners of the restaurant, they didn't say, oh, we're hiring you specifically because you look good. But I remember them using certain language like, we can work on your experience. Like we know you have like limited experience, but you seem like you'll be easy to train. You have a great personality and you definitely fit the look that we're going for. So we're going to go ahead and give you a chance. My looks tend to get me indoors, but my skill set, my personality, those things keep me indoors. Because the thing is those types of commitments that people make based on people's looks, they're very fickle. Right? We already know how the beauty industry works. After a certain point, they're tossing you out and they're bringing in the newest pretty girl or whatever the case may be. So I used to be really upset about it. I used to spend my nights bitching about it to whoever would listen, right? Like, I hate that this is why people have chosen me. But then I'm like, you know what? But everything else about me is going to keep me here. As far as like dating goes, a lot of the time you can't tell if somebody likes you for you or your looks. 9 times out of 10, especially men, especially cis het men, they eventually reveal that, and granted, that's how dating works, right? Majority of it is like physical attraction. But then it becomes kind of discouraging to figure out the lengths people will go to, men specifically, cis het men specifically, the lengths they would go to be connected to what is seen as a beautiful woman. We essentially become like an accessory or a trophy. And it's not fun at all. Another thing is a lot of people just assume that I'm only interested in men with a certain type of like status. You know, I've dated men who were genuinely like confused about why I even wanted anything to do with them. And I'm like, because looks are really just bullshit. Like, I don't care how you look. And there are men who are just people in general who are good looking and don't realize how good looking they are. And of course, society's beauty standard has a lot to do with that. So I've dated men who would, majority of our conversations are, you could be with anybody. Why are you with me? And I'm like, that's fucking exhausting. You know what I mean? Like,
because I can be attracted to you even though you don't
meet a certain like look, right? Even though you're not super muscular, you don't look like a fucking Ken doll, excuse my French, but just because I'm like your height or a little bit taller, or just because, you know, you're not super ripped, I'm attracted to you, not your physique, not your looks, not your glasses or lack thereof. Like, I'm attracted to you. I actually listen to you when we have conversations. You know, I like your personality. Are you doing the same? Clearly you're not. Because if you actually listen to the things that I said, you would know why I'm with you. You would know that I don't give a like. It's things like that.
I think they're thinking from their angle. Like, I think that's why, like, a lot of like they might assume like a woman likes him because like they're being nice. That's because a lot of men might not be nice to a woman unless they find her attractive, which is part of the whole beauty bias.
Yeah. Yeah. And that fades away over time. Like men being nice to you for your looks.
Yeah, I was gonna say that too. Like, I've been that person who someone fitting the societal standard of like beauty has had an interest in me, right? Like, super fine man, and I'm just like,
Oh
why?
My God.
And throughout the entire relationship, like, even if the person showed me like I have a vested interest in you, like I like you physically, I also like you personality wise, and the entire time I'm like, but why? Because, and Kavita brought up an interesting point, men who don't find you attractive treat you like shit, either by pure dismissal,
it's true,
or in a more blatant way.
And I think it comes down to their character, right? Like, I think one of the things that I say is like my special power being abstinent is I can tell really easily if someone's like a kind, because a kind person's gonna be nice regardless. Like, they don't care what you look like, that's just their natural state. Versus someone who's nice, like they were nice depending on like what they think you can do for them. And I feel like that's what I've noticed. Either they're gonna treat you like some type of way, or they're going to be nice because that's just who they are.
Everybody here has experienced that from men, right?
Yeah,
like,
I am so used to being out with my friends, being the only fat person or being the quote unquote least attractive person in the group, and having men approach the rest of the group, literally not even acknowledge, not even say good night, how are you, look me in the face. It's either they treat you like you don't exist, or they are able to treat you with like humanity and like some form of kindness.
Right.
It's funny how this conversation is going to kind of go back to men again, because it's for them like, do I want to have sex with you? And I'm going to base that. It's not even, am I attracted to you? It's, are you attractive enough for me to
sleep with? Because can we talk? The reality is men don't even really like us like that. They just, if they could control, like, they don't like us. They just are like, hey, this is the anatomy that I'm attracted to. This is the anatomy that my body wants to have sex with. So they just tolerate us. They don't like us. I'm sorry. Majority of men, cis het men specifically, don't like us at all. And so they tolerate us as much as they can. And then they're like, listen, if I got to tolerate these broads, they need to at least be attractive in my eyes. Like, it's unfortunate. It's really weird.
I mean, they definitely, and I think that's why this topic of men comes up in discussions of pretty privileged, because they're the ones who are more swayed by appearances like that. Versus I feel like women, being the fact that we're subject to the standards, they approach things differently, you know? And I think in general, even when it comes to dating, I think women, sometimes they can grow in attraction to someone based on their personality. So I think the beauty bias and all of the pretty privileged discussions inevitably comes into play of how we're treated by them. And of course, I know on being on the extreme end, I'm not on it, but just hearing from other people who are on the extreme end, maybe Deidre can speak to this, that if you are seen as extremely attractive, then you do get bad attention from women because they're jealous or they feel intimidated, which I know is like the other side of that coin.
I don't assume that people are jealous of me because I think that is so fucking ridiculous. However, I have had experiences where some women have treated me badly. And they like I'm never gonna be the person to assume that it's because I'm more attractive than them or anything like that. A lot of the times, it's because people don't take me seriously. And so that's happened a lot throughout my career. Like I've entered work settings and just not been taken seriously because of the way I show up, right? I'm done up. So I've had women in workspaces treat me like shit, right? Especially bosses. But if by chance I'm being mistreated by less attractive women because of my looks, I'm not gonna shine a light on that person mistreating me if that's the reason why they're mistreating me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I'm not gonna if for instance, and this has happened where I've been in meetings and then like this boss who is deemed or considered less attractive than me is just mean to me, right? Or dismissing me. I'm not gonna shine a light on it and call all this attention to her being dismissive toward me. You know, I'm gonna find my way back into the conversation. I'm gonna assert myself, and because I know when I have a good point, I'm gonna make it, right? I'm not gonna just cower, but I'm also not gonna be like, let's say her name is Ashley. Ashley, you were just so rude to me. What is the reason? Like, I'm not gonna do all that. Like, I don't see the point.
It's also like you don't want to assume that this is the reason, because then it's like you don't want to insinuate or like tell this person you are treating me this way because you're unattractive, because then what the fuck does that even mean?
What does that even and for me, I never make that assumption because some people are just miserable, right? Some people treat everybody like shit. People who are deemed less attractive, they already get mistreated by the world. So why would I then call out the fact that you're mistreating me so that everybody can say, oh, Ashley is so mean, why is she treating Deidre this way? I feel like that's just going to make things worse, and it's just genuinely unnecessary.
Being someone who's on the other side, like I never saw the point of being mean to someone because of that. Because I'm like, one, and I just say this because one, it doesn't change my situation. Two, I just end up being mean and like I end up hurting someone. So I just feel like it's a lose-lose situation, right? And even though it's a product of the patriarchy, I just don't see the point of like being mean to someone because again, it's not their fault on how they look, and like it doesn't do anything so just create like mishaps. But apparently it's a situation that I've heard about. Again, I've not experienced it, obviously firsthand, not being on the side, and I've never chosen to take the stance of being so mean because again, I just don't understand the point of it. You know, like I can see people, I don't know.
I've been both people, right? I've been the person who has experienced sort of resentment and kind of like meanness from people who may not necessarily benefit from pretty privilege, right? But then I've also been the person who like resents someone who does benefit from pretty privilege, right? And I want to talk about the conversations as it relates to colorism first, because I will never forget, I used to have a friend who was light-skinned like me. She was essentially the quintessential, like, she had that biracial aesthetic. Checks the boxes in every sense.
In our community, yeah.
Right? So not only does she benefit from pretty privilege, but she also quote unquote benefits from like colorism, right? And I remember her going on this rant about how like mean dark-skinned girls were to her in high school and growing up. And she's like, you know, basically because of colorism, because they feel like I'm benefiting. And I'm like, but did they say that to you? Because like, is it fair? And I always wonder when we have these conversations and I hear light-skinned women say this, is it fair for you to assume that the reason that this person may not like you or this person may not have taken to you was because they found you more attractive than them? And then what is this assumption that you're more attractive than them? And can you explore that? Because who told you? Obviously society did, but like, check yourself at the same time.
Yeah,
right?
why are you assuming that these dark-skinned women are so invested or angry, right?
Yeah. And then on the other end of it, I've been the person who I see how much more easily friends of mine have navigated spaces and dating and social media, right? We've talked about it, Deidre, where like I was doing my influencer thing, right? And I was creating content. And I would post something, right?
And it would be fully stolen from you?
And it would be fully stolen from me by someone who was
I'm looking at y'all who be stealing my sis's content. That's why I was like, wait, which camera? this camera.
But not even just
fully
that, right?
stealing
Not
the
even
phone.
just when the content was stolen. There would be other creators who would jump on their Instagram thing and blow up in months, super quickly. And I had been doing it for like 10 years at that point, right? Blogging, content creation. And I was struggling to gain a following for content that everyone was agreeing was like really, really good, right?
Yeah.
I won't knock my talents here. I'm very talented at this stuff.
Hey, Isa does this.
But I was working so hard to get this like attention and like, I guess like accolades or whatever. Whereas like someone with, oh God, I gonna sound like I turned shade, but I'm not. But someone with like super big, super pretty hair, or someone who's like a Eurocentric standard of like beauty, or someone again who's just skinny.
The algorithms also push it out. Like, I think
for
there was an
sure,
article
for sure.
from TikTok or somewhere, I don't know, but someone said like they do push out people who are closer to like conventional standards. And I think the only reason like I gained traction was because I think I spoke about it. Like if I did what the other people did, I would have never gotten traction. Not that I initially went in with the notion that I was going to gain traction, but I think I only did because I spoke about a topic that most people, and anyone who ever talks about pretty privilege, they often have a form of pretty privilege, so no one like resonates with it. I think people resonated with mine because they're like, oh, I can see that she's doesn't meet the standard and she's actually, I think that's the only reason I did. But I couldn't ever, and I think I have, all my videos need to have some sort of like substance, if that makes sense. Like I can't post like a fluff piece because I mean, people who support me and a community might, but like in general, no one really cares if I post like a random video, like, oh, here's a cookie that I ate. I don't know. You know, like,
right.
I can't.
Yeah.
You know who gets away with that? Pretty people.
Especially.
And I'm not saying you're not pretty because I think you're beautiful, but the people who meet those standards of beauty, they just be posting stuff of no substance that nobody can learn from. And then it's like what?
Especially
and I never
white women. That's how they're able to get away with stealing content, especially from Black creators and from creators.
And I'm so sorry that happened to you. If you like, I'm more than happy to like boost your stuff. Like, don't worry.
Oh, you're fine. I'm good now. Like I'm at this place in my life now where like I
don't fuck with content creation.
I don't really like fuck with social media anymore. Like I kind of hide behind the podcast now, and that's the other thing, right? I've found so much more joy being behind the podcast page because our content isn't based on aesthetic. It's so much more based on what we're talking about. And the people who do engage with our content are so much more genuine. Whereas when I was trying to do the influencer thing, I was like, oh my God, these people need to find me attractive in order to engage with my content. But they don't. And I can tell because when another creator posts the same thing, they get thousands of like hits, right? And I'll be honest here, I'm Moments of Transparency, and Diamond, I love you. I hope you don't shade me. So there was a point in time where Diamond had lost access to her account. And I had, at that time, a pretty big following, but she had a bigger one, right? Someone had hacked her account. So I started taking Diamond's content and posting it on my page to tell people like, hey, she had created like a temporary page, I think, or she had an alternate.
She was using her business page in the meantime. Yeah.
So I was like, okay, I knew for a fact that because people are extremely attracted to Diamond, all I needed to do was post Diamond and people would gravitate to her business page, right? And I wanted to help her with that because she works really hard. She creates amazing content. She deserves that following, right?
Yeah.
But it was
and that's the thing, because that following that page that got hacked, she had earned that following organically.
She earned it.
It was Absolutely. There was no bots. She earned that following organically.
And she again creates amazing content, right? But the thing that I found interesting, or the thing that blew my mind, is that me posting one video at Diamond, my page went insane, right?
Oh my God.
And I was happy because I wanted people to go follow my sister, right? I was like, go follow my sister, like, yeah. But I knew, like,
it was because of her.
I felt so conflicted because I was like, am I exploiting her looks with this, right?
Oh.
Because I know that when I post her, people are going to be like, wow, this hourglass shaped, dark skinned, fine ass Black woman. Let's go.
You talking about that video of her in the black dress walking?
Walking, yeah.
Jesus
and
Christ.
That video's gone viral multiple times. It's gone viral.
That video keeps going viral.
But I was, and then people started following me thinking that I was her instead of reading the caption and going to the other page. And that was where I felt conflicted because I was like, damn, my page is getting a bunch of engagement, but I felt like I had used Diamond's attractiveness in a way, right? And I had to kind of like come to terms like, okay, Haza, that wasn't your intent when you posted this, so you're not using her.
Yeah.
And you never would. But it also blew my mind of like, wow, I've never seen this type of engagement, even from people who followed me at the time. They hadn't engaged with any of my posts, but the minute I posted Diamond, they were like blowing the shit up, commenting, hard eyes, all this stuff. And I'm like, wow, like I remember feeling a bit jealous, like, wow, to look like her, like, must be amazing. But then dialing it back, I also have had conversations with Diamond about colorism, about how at the same time there are spaces where she doesn't benefit.
Yeah, there's spaces where she doesn't benefit, but
beauty.
But further to that, it's like that look it's like exploitive. Like it's
Exactly.
and then we become like over sexualized because our aesthetic tends to be associated more so with sex. Certain things that we wear just automatically look like sex on us. Certain types of like dresses or just like outfits where it would look modest on somebody else, it looks sexy on us. Like we have to work really hard to not look like we're trying to be sexy. And so for social media, right, that benefits us. We just post a picture and the girlies are going off. Like everybody's posting the heart eyes. But then it's like that you feel kind of empty experiencing that so much. It feels you feel very empty. And even though you have all this substance, it's like nobody's interested in that. That shit sucks. Like it sucks.
Yeah.
It's really ridiculous.
That's why I wanted to bring that up, and like again why I think it's so important for us to have this conversation in multiple contexts, because pretty privilege doesn't feel good, I think, when you focus on like the source of it. Like if you benefit from it and you think about the fact that you benefit from it, then it leads to that emptiness, right? Of like, well, what else is there? And then when you don't benefit, you're constantly thinking about like, damn, my life would be so much fucking easier maybe if I could just get an ounce of this type of privilege, right? So with that, I want to take us back to this conversation on confidence, right? And Kavita, I'll pass it to you here, because we talked about it when we started. I discovered your TikTok because there was a comment made on one of your pretty privilege videos where someone basically was like, well, why don't you just have plastic surgery to like quote unquote fix these problems that you claim you're having? And you had a really eloquent response to it at the time, but I wanted to know, like, how often do people suggest to you when you bring up pretty privilege and how you haven't benefited from it? Like, how often do people just suggest to you that you change something about yourself in those conversations?
Very often. If you go to the comment sections of any of my videos, you'll see it like rampant. And like sometimes, like I know some people mean well, but they'll be like, "Oh, you're not ugly, but just change this, and this is like." If you're saying list all that, that takes away from it, you know. And I think the core of the issue is, and like whenever I speak to it, I'm really speaking to like basic decency. Like forget like how people talk about how some people benefit from like getting certain opportunities or free stuff. Like I'm not even talking about stuff. I'm just talking about like basic decency, because some people will just look at you and just give you these looks or treat you really mean and rude and like laugh at you. It's like very like dehumanizing experiences. And so a lot of people's solution is just change all this, but they don't realize like the core of the issue is why are we allowing people to be saying like, oh, they don't deserve respect. Like in order to be treated with respect, you need to look like some type of way, And I think what I should tell people is like, one, I do put effort in, and two, I never like resonated with the whole plastic surgery thing, because at the end of the day, like if I'm going to go through all of this, right, pay all that money, it's not going to change the issue at hand. And on top of that, it's going to be, I think it'd be super disheartening to see like, I did all of that to be treated well by people who didn't even give a shit in the first place, like
that part.
Yeah.
That's the part that scares me too, because as a fat woman, people recommend weight loss to me all the time, right? If I talk about fat phobia and how I'm treated like shit, people are like, well, if you don't like something about yourself, just change it. And they always say, if you don't like the fact that you're fat, just change it. And what I'm trying to get them to see is, I do like the fact that I'm fat. I just wish I wasn't treated like shit all the time
shit because I'm fat.
It. I wish I could go to a restaurant and eat and not look up to find some old bitch staring at me. Like, let's just be real,
so
because I'm eating, right?
Like,
and I see this happen every day. I see it again. I talked about it earlier, where if I'm out with my friends, men will blatant. I've been bumped into by men on their way to talking to the friend who was right next to me, like I wasn't even there, right? And the issue is not that I wanted that man to notice me, it's that I didn't want him to treat me like shit because he didn't find me attractive. You see what I'm saying?
And that's the thing. It's just not being treated like as if you're like nothing. And that's the thing that people don't understand. It's not, they're like, oh, you just want free stuff. I'm like, no, I don't care about their free stuff. Like, keep your free stuff. I'm like, just like, I just want the decent respect. And people literally treat you like you're garbage, you know? And then people are like, oh, just be confident. And it's so hard to constantly validate and be confident when you go into the world. Like, sometimes I'll just go out and do my own thing, and then I'll just have these like interactions, and it like takes a toll, and people don't understand.
And when people talk about confidence, I wish they understood how confidence is internal, but confidence is also affirmed, right? When a child is confident, it's not because it came from nowhere. It's usually because their parent is consistently instilling that confidence in them. So if I'm staying home and I'm working on my confidence and I'm building my confidence, but then I wear something and I go out with my friends and my friends are like, you don't have that in a bigger size? Or someone's staring at me because I'm wearing a crop top, or someone's staring at me because I'm trying to eat. I could have all the confidence in the fucking world and it still can get beat down by the interactions that I have in public with other people. Same thing with Lizzo is a good example of this. Lizzo is an extremely confident woman. She's an extremely beautiful woman with an amazing personality who deserves to feel that confidence. But when she goes out, when she does anything, when she breathes, there's fucking people like Kanye West who are getting interviewed on major platforms and asked, what do you think about Lizzo's body? Unwarranted, unprompted, people are just giving opinions on her body. So yes, that fucks with your confidence.
Of course.
And the irony of it is that when she responds or when she says that she's offended, people are like, just be confident, bitch. Like
what do y'all want from this woman? Like, my God. And that's the thing right there, because why is her weight a topic of discussion?
Because
why is her,
she's a fat black
I mean, we
woman
already
who
know
loves
why,
herself.
right? We already know why, but it's just like, that's the point right there. We are all human beings, right?
Yeah.
Somebody's physical appearance is not supposed to be a factor. It's not supposed to influence entire discussions. Kanye West don't got like sneakers or something to promote. Why they asking him about Lizzo's weight?
The thing is, like, confidence can help you and whatever, but it's still like the whole point is like, they're like, oh yeah, it's okay if people treat you like shit, just be confident about it. And that's not the point. Like, it sounds ridiculous, right? To be like, oh, just, and you can't fake it. Like, I hate when people like fake it too, because if you have no foundation, then how is fake confidence going to help you in situations where people are literally like attacking you left and right, you know?
It's never going to work. It's never going to work.
Yep.
And then even the reality is even like just the use of the word confidence, it's absurd, because when you do have that confidence, regardless of whether or not the masses affirm it, then they call you arrogant. Because so for one, you step out with this confidence, right? You step out with the confidence. They are questioning the confidence. They're beating you down. You remain confident. Oh, she's so arrogant. She thinks she's better than everyone. Well, bitch, what do you want? What do you want?
Yeah.
It's like, what do y'all want?
And it's if you maintain that confidence, but also if you speak up for yourself in these conversations, right?
Yes.
I think that a lot of the vitriol people get is that people who are perpetuating this behavior don't want to be called out on it, right? Whether they're upholding standards of beauty, whether they are treating you differently because they find you beautiful, especially men, right? Men don't want to hear that they're out here treating people like shit on a regular basis because they genuinely think that they're nice people. And they're not.
Some of them are.
Some of them are. I'm married to one very nice guy.
But you know what? The ones who are, if they don't stand up to the ones who aren't, then they not nice neither.
Exactly. And that's the core of it, right? Like we've been saying this whole time. It's not that I want you to somehow magically find me attractive. If you don't, fine, whatever. I just don't want you to treat me like shit because you don't, right?
Yes.
I don't want you to act like I don't exist because you don't treat other men like that, right? You don't base your interactions with men in the world on whether or not you find them attractive. You only do that to women. So don't do that shit to me is all I'm asking, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting because this lady posted a video. It went viral on Twitter recently, and I was like, wow, this is going to fit in with our conversation. She actually posted it on TikTok. It got reposted on Twitter, where she said, like, I go out with my friends and it's like I don't exist. And like, what do I need to do, right? And I think a part of it is that obviously she wants to be found attractive and she wants to be interacted with, but she was talking about this concept that we're talking about, right? Like, I just want to exist. I want, when someone walks up to my group of friends and talks to them, to be spoken to for someone to have a conversation with me too. And people were like, oh, she just needs to be confident. She just needs to do this. And they're giving all these recommendations. And I'm like, wow, you guys navigate the world in a very different way than those of us who like understand this concept. Like, I understood exactly what she was talking about, but I was afraid to speak on it because I was like, if somebody tells me to be confident, I'm probably going to like get banned.
I'm gonna confidently backhand you, bitch.
I think I might have stitched that video.
It was a Black woman, right?
Yeah. And I think she wasn't, and because I saw a lot of stitches that were like giving her all these like things, but it was very invalidating. I think people struggle to just validate, like, hey, sometimes things suck. Like, you know, it's not fair. And she wasn't even asking, like, she was like, how can I do this? I don't want my friends to dim their light. Like, it was a very genuine video that she made. Like, she was just expressing how she
said that. Yeah, I love that she said that too. Like, I don't want my friends to dim their light. I don't want them to be less attractive. I don't want them to bend for me. I just also feel that I'm attractive and I deserve to be interacted with. Like, it's yeah.
And instead of men hearing that and saying, holy shit, maybe I need to do a better job of, even if I'm attracted in friend A, at least saying hello to friend B and asking how her day was. They didn't hear that. They didn't hear, oh, we could do a better job giving everybody some level of respect. They heard, she's not confident, right? When I'm the only Black woman in a room, that's the experience I have. The experience that you guys have, that's the experience I have when I'm the only Black person in the room, you know? So... And maybe that's why I'm able to I'm able to empathize and be like, yeah, that's fucked up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's possible to just hear that and just listen. Yeah. And then also ask, what can I do better? Right? And you guys are saying what people can do better.
Yeah. And in the same light, Deidre, I think that there are people who can and should also be able to empathize with your experience, right? People should also be able to see you and hear your experience and say, oh, I hadn't thought of it like that. Like, that's fucked up that you have to experience that without saying, shut up, bitch, you're pretty. Like,
right. Because, and you know, and I talked about this in our private conversation. That's been the experience, which is why I never participate in conversations like this, because it turns into, girl, you're pretty, shut the fuck up. Like, you know, this girl went viral on TikTok. Very, very beautiful white woman. She's beautiful, right? Typical. She looked like a Barbie doll. She had these big doe eyes. They might have been green or blue or something. She was beautiful, right? And she made a video pretty much, and I think she was responding to a man's comment, because I think she's like a single mother. She's like a divorcee or something. Mm-hmm. And this man commented on one of her videos pretty much saying, how are you even single? Like, you're so stunning, something along those lines. We get that bullshit all the time. Like, bitch,
we're single,
like, we're literally single by choice. If I wanted to be in a relationship just to be in a relationship, I would be in a relationship, right? Like, I'm not going to be in a relationship just... Anyway, back to the point. So she made a video responding to his comment, pretty much saying, like, it's really hard to date when you're, quote, this beautiful, because you can't tell if somebody likes you for you. And she said, I don't believe my husband even liked me. She was talking about her ex-husband. And she was like, over time, she realized her ex-husband didn't like her, didn't care to get to know her. He only wanted somebody to give him beautiful children. And she kind of broke this down. She was very eloquent when she explained everything. And she was like, it's just a little difficult to date. Like, yeah, you might see it as this is a beautiful person. They can have whomever they want. But the reality is these people only want me because I'm beautiful, and they have no interest in getting to know me. They don't see me as human. Like, it's really discouraging. And in the comments, it was literally a split between other people who have that experience and people who are like, you need to shut the fuck up, you're ungrateful. And they were talking just like that, because I even commented to reaffirm what she was saying. Like, I get what you're saying. I know what that feels like. This is why I'm single. This is why I'm actively single, because I can't tell who's interested in me for me or who's interested in being seen with a beautiful woman. Somebody literally responded to my comment and was like, shut the fuck up. Like, they like dragged me, and I was like, and this is why I don't participate in these conversations. Like, what the fuck?
It's so vitriolic, and it comes into play with this. It comes into play with a bunch of different conversations. Like, I wish we could be a lot more objective about things, like the human experience, right? because even when we talk about, and I'm willing to say it, even when we talk about white privilege, right?
Mm-hmm.
To an extent, I'm not very flexible there because I'm like, okay, girl, at the end of the day, you benefit more than literally insert group here.
Yeah.
In a lot of different spaces. So I'm less empathetic there, but at the same time, I do get that sometimes there are white people who have,
they're marginalized in their own right, right?
They have their marginalizations, but also they have good intent. And when they approach these conversations and they want to have objective conversations, they get shut down because it's like, shut up, you have privilege. We don't have to talk about this. And sometimes I wish we would have more space for those conversations because people don't learn when they're shut out like that.
Absolutely.
People
Absolutely.
don't approach things with empathy when they get like vitriol, when they try to learn, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So to an extent, there's a lot of patience that I don't
Very
have
small
with white
group.
people because listen, I'm from a place that is still very much colonized. So
I was
don't
gonna say
a
they
lot
don't
of
have a
patience.
history of doing right by people, so I see why they're so shut down.
And
you
there's
know?
not a lot of empathy I get from them in return. But when it comes to other people in positions of privilege, when it comes to like skinny women, when it comes to people who benefit from like pretty privilege and beauty bias, like I do have empathy because like Deidre, you and I have had this conversation so many times, but I get how neither of us really benefit. Like, sure, you might be getting access to things, but you're also being treated differently because of this thing. And we're not benefiting. And at the end of the day, the only people who are benefiting are the people who feel like life should operate on like these Eurocentric.
Yeah, the only people who are benefiting are the people who created it.
Yeah, essentially.
And we know who that is.
Which again,
do we need to say it?
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's also like a spectrum, right? Like you're saying, it's not black and white. It's like a spectrum, right? There's like some benefits, there's intersectionality. And I think it's just like important to acknowledge the privileges that exist just so we can work towards like being mindful of like the way we treat other people, right?
Yes.
I think like, and I think like that's like even myself, like I don't have pretty privilege, but I have a form of like thin privilege, right? Like, I've always been thin my whole life. So there's things that I've never had to think about. So like I think it's important also to speak about it because I feel like when you don't meet this person to speak about it, people are more likely to take you seriously on it because they're not distracted by telling you, oh, fix this stuff about yourself, right? Like, and I think that's why it's so much more impactful. Like I think I saw this one story. It's not about pretty privilege, but it's about thin privilege where she's a plus size person and she was starving and she was out with her friends and she was like literally starving, but like her friends weren't hungry, so she didn't eat because she's like, if I'm sitting there by myself eating, people will be so mean to me.
That's eating.
And it's just like something that I've never thought about. And I was like, this, so I think it's wild. And I think that's why I think it's important to acknowledge the privilege that exists, but also like be mindful of the different things. But, I think it's a lot of things going on. Like I said, it's a lot of different layers.
Yeah. I think about that all the time, especially as a fat person. Like I find myself looking at my skinny friends like, wow, you don't have to think about this thing. Like this is not something that crosses I've gone to stores with friends, right? And I'll wrap up the episode after this. I went to Mexico with my former boss, and in the city in Mexico that we were in San Miguel de Allende, and there were a lot of these boutique stores, right? And I know as a fat woman, I have no interest in boutique stores because if it's not like a Ross or an online store or something else, there is not going to be anything above a large in that store. There's nothing in there for me, right? So we would be walking. She'd be like, oh, look at this. You want to go in here and see if you find anything? And she was coming from the best place possible, right? But I was like, no. And she thought, we sat down to lunch and she was like, you haven't bought anything. Like, I thought you were, going to be shopping and stuff. And I was like, yeah, but those stores aren't going to have my size. And she was like, well, how do you know? And I was like, girl, no stores have my size. I'm a 2X, 3X. Like, that's not a normal thing. Even when I was small, when I was like extra large and large, it's still weird to be able to find your size in stores like that because they're not created for you, right? So her and I ended up having this whole conversation about how I navigate clothing and like shopping and the understanding that certain things aren't made for me. Or we would go to restaurants and they would have those fucking metal chairs with the bars that come down the sides, right? Where if you have big hips and you sit there, it cuts off your circulation. Even if you're not a big person, even if you have wide hips, they're painful to sit in. And she was like starting to kind of open her eyes to this experience for the first time, because she's a thin white woman with thin white woman, like mom, sister, her friends are thin. She had never really like seen what the plus size experience is like.
Yeah.
And I was like educating her throughout the whole trip, right? And her mind was blown, because she was like, wow, like this is a completely different like life experience than what I don't navigate the world with that in my head. And I was like, yeah. I was like, so that's why you have to be conscious when you do things, right? Because your experience is not everyone's experience. But I say this all to say, like, it's so interesting when we have these conversations to like be enlightened to other people's life experiences. And like, that's why we do this show. That's why we have conversations like this. Like, because if we don't, there's no empathy, there's no compassion. Everyone is just walking around assuming what other people's intent and like life paths are. And maybe there's men who are listening to this episode who also experience this pretty privileged beauty bias conversation in their world in a different way. My husband talks about it all the time. And he talks to me often about the way he experiences the world as a man who doesn't fit that like tall, muscular,
like a tall drink of milk
aesthetic. Yeah, right? And he, speaks to me often about like how he had to navigate like high school and not being found attractive and not being approached, not all of this stuff. And I had never, until I spoke to him, thought about what the male version of that experience is like.
Yeah.
And I think it's so interesting, like, to hear him talk about it. So if you're a man and you're listening to this episode, like, please share your story with us, because I think more men need to be having this conversation as well.
Absolutely.
Y'all perpetuate it, but also, like, y'all also experience
it too. You know what? Okay, I'm not a man and I'm not trying to speak for them, but I feel like I feel like sometimes when men don't fit that standard, what they end up doing is working really hard to have like financial success so they can wield that. I think that's what ends up happening with men, is they just are like, oh, I don't meet this standard, so I'm going to meet that one, and I'm going to become powerful in that way, and the fine guys are going to work for me.
There are men who don't meet that standard who still then go online and uphold
and become incels, who start podcasts and fight their mamas for pizza bagels. And drag beautiful women and assume that beautiful women don't want them, when the reality is beautiful women, or women period, don't want you because you're mean, not because you're unattractive physically. You're unattractive in your heart. That's where you're unattractive, Bob.
And I think they have their struggles, but I think the opportunity that they can like compensate in other ways, right? And like appeal, I think, with women, there's like really not an alternative, because again, it comes out the way society designed it. But it's all
because a woman can build up all the power in a wall, right? A woman can become rich. And if she's still unattractive, even that richness, like, suddenly she's a bitch. Suddenly she's mean.
Oh, yeah. She's too bossy. She's disrespectful.
Because she's not physically attractive.
Yeah, and she emasculates the men that work for her. And, women
it's a mess.
Let's just go off and start our own society. Let's just go. Let's go. I have my son. I'll raise him to be a good man. Let's go start a society.
My final question is this for both of you. Do you think that the societal standard of beauty will ever change?
Maybe like what's considered beautiful will change, but like I feel like for the foreseeable future, there'll be a standard of beauty, like of some sort of, and people continue to like treat people some type of way. Like, I think it's gonna be a very long time until people get to a state where they'll be like, let me treat this person decently, right? Because I think, like, besides kind people who are just automatically wired to treat people with decency, I think other people need to be incentivized, which sounds so weird, right? Because like you have to like have an incentive to treat someone nicely. Right. I think until that's like done, or people are held accountable, like it's very hard for me to see how they can be like, let me treat this person decently, right? Because they're like, what's the incentive for them? And because I get into these conversations, people are always like, well, because if their instinct is always to be like, change this about yourself, they don't care that people are out here treating someone like some type of way. They're more like, no, just change this about yourself. That's the solution. When really the problem is how people are treating other individuals,
Yeah.
What about you, Deidre?
Very much that. I don't know, to be honest. I can see how it would change over time, but the sad thing is I don't see how the collective's treatment of those who don't fit it will change. Does that make sense? Yeah. Like, I feel like, let's say the standard eventually fully shifts from Eurocentric features to like a more curvaceous build or more ethnic features. Then I feel like the people who initially had those original beautiful features are then going to be the ones who are kind of tossed aside. Yeah, that's how I feel. I hope I'm wrong. I want to be wrong, honey, but that's what I feel.
White supremacy is such a bitch that I don't ever see the standard of beauty not being some version of Eurocentric, right?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Because even in the colorism conversation where like it was once blatantly obvious and accepted to find dark-skinned women not as attractive, like you said, even as you start to see that change, the dark-skinned women who are found attractive
have Eurocentric
standards.
Correct.
Same thing with plus-size women, right?
Or the inverse is
mm-hmm.
when ethnic features are adopted by like you're like
the Kardashian,
or like I think the eyebrows, like that's a big thing that like in South Asian, that's like one of the things where I don't need to color in because I'm like, but that for the longest time was mocked, and now that it's a trend, you see, but it's only celebrated because it's been adopted by exactly. That's the
and it's the same thing with plus size women, because like at one point it was like accepted to like openly mock and like find fat women disgusting, right? But now even the body positive movement and the fat women who are found attractive are the Ashley Grahams and the Tabria Majors of the world, who have these hourglass like acceptable standards of fat features, but then if you look at their faces, they meet the Eurocentric standard of right? They're also beautiful women who just happen to be plus size.
Oh, like Takara from ANTM.
Yeah. So, or even when you think about Takara from America's Next Top
Model,
she
wasn't even big. Wasn't she like a size 10 or something?
She was like a size 10, but the woman who eventually became the first plus size winner of America's Top Model was a blonde, blue-eyed white woman, right? Yeah. And she was this celebrated plus size model, but like Whitney was a white woman. Like it was also because she was a beautiful white woman. Like it's I don't see us ever really straying from that white supremacist kind of view of it.
Agreed. Yeah.
Because it's so deeply fucking embedded into our cultures. And there are people who still aren't willing to accept that it is, right? That is white supremacy. So yeah, this was such a good conversation. Like we could go all day, but I know we're already at like our hour. But yeah, Kavita, I want to pass it back to you. How can the audience find you and like support your content and make sure that like we're continuing to have this conversation online?
Thank you. And once again, thank you so much for having me on. But yeah, you guys can find me on TikTok at Bitter to Better. Bitter to Better. Still working through it.
I like that.
I love it. And I'll make sure to tag Kavita in the description, her username and everything like that. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on with us and having this conversation. I always am so appreciative of guests who don't know us and don't know our show being like, I'll come on, because I'm random as fuck and I'll be like, I just emailed you. So I appreciate you being responsive and like working out the schedule and everything with us. And it's been such a great conversation. So
no, thank you so much. And I'm so glad that I came across and I've been connected to you guys. Like I said, I was just saying earlier on that I started listening to some of your episodes. I've been trying to get into podcasts, so it seems like your conversation style is very like it's easy. It's not like I have a really bad attention span, so it's it's engaging.
We do too.
Thank you. Yeah, we do. I always say I have the attention span of a squirrel. Like it's just all over the place. But thank you for coming. We're so grateful.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who's listening. You know where to find us. We'll be right back here next week with another episode. If you would like to get this episode or any other episodes 1 week early, as well as the full video of all of our content, you can become a patron of the podcast over at patreon.com/gooduppodcast. We utilize all of our Patreon income to keep the motherfucking lights on, to pay for all of our subscriptions, equipment, all that stuff. And Deidre and I have a fundraising goal. I'm going to put it out there. Deidre and I have a fundraising goal. We have been recording this show for 3 years and have never recorded a session together. We have not seen each other in person since
years.
High school. Deidre and I have not seen each other in person, and the audience is like, we want a live show, we want this, we want that, but we need money to do it. So think about becoming a patron. The lowest tier on Patreon is $1 a month. And then there are some other tiers as well. If you own a business, we also have advertisement and sponsorship packages. Shout out to our first sponsor, Empath Psychological Services. We appreciate
y'all.
you. So yeah, just think about supporting the show financially, because we're going to be saving towards doing this in person at some point next year. And every contribution to the show will really, really help. So tell a friend to tell a friend. If you're a patron and you love this show and you've been benefiting from being a patron, tell the people online so that they can go do the same thing. And with that being said, make sure you use hashtag GoodUpTuesday and tag us at GoodUpPod on social media to continue the conversation. We love y'all, and we will see y'all right back here next week. Deidre, tell the people then. Bye.
Bye.
Good Up is hosted and produced by Deidre Ritter and Heiza Quinones Ivory. Find us on all social media platforms at Good Up Pod. Use hashtag GoodUpTuesday to continue the conversation and get access to exclusive bonus content at patreon.com/GoodUpPodcast.